Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Mormon Stories Live, Mormon Stories Podcast. I'm your host, John DeLynn. It is Monday, April 24th, 2017. We're joined together on Facebook Live, but we'll also be sharing this afterwards on the podcast and on YouTube. But we're so very, very excited to have someone who I've wanted to have on the podcast for, at least a year or two. Her name is Kimberly Anderson. But before we dive in, I'm going to go ahead and just make a few announcements. These announcements are really important. So bear with us. Listeners, thanks for joining us. For those who are interested, we just wanted to make sure that we always talk about some of our upcoming events because many people find lots of value in these events, and we want to make sure people know about them. We've had a few new decisions. So several Mormon Stories events coming up. May 4th through 5th will be in Fort Collins, Colorado. That's going to be fabulous. July 7th through 8th, we're going to have a Texas retreat. So imagine 2 full days in Texas. We're going to be in Dallas, but we want Austin, Houston, San Antonio, and even Oklahoma City and surrounding cities to join us. We're going to have a lot more info, but July 7th and 8th, we're going to be in Dallas. August 11th through 12th, we're going to be doing a mixed story and a mixed faith marriage all day. It's actually going to be a day and a half workshop. So August 11th through 12th, they actually may be 2 days. I think it's changing. But Dr. Julie DeAzevedo-Hanks and I are teaming together to do an entire 2-day event focused on couples who are in mixed faith marriages. That's going to be August 11th through 12th. We're really excited about that. September 14th and 15th will be in Seattle, Washington. So we hope Portland, Seattle, Vancouver all represent there. We're going to be in Australia, October 20th through 22nd. Please join us if you're interested. We're going to take a few days before and just kind of tour Australia. And we're going to be at a great little retreat center in Australia. And then to round out the year, we've decided to add the Bay Area to our agenda. So we don't have exact dates yet for November, but those of you who are in, San Francisco, Oakland, Bay Area, Sacramento, maybe even Fresno, if that's not too far away, we would love to do something in Northern California. So anyone with any questions, please feel free to email us at mormonstories@gmail.com. Please register for these events. If we don't have the registration pages up now, we will within the next week, and we're just really excited about those events. We want to go ahead and just thank all our listeners to Mormon Stories Live, to Mormon Transitions, to the other Open Stories Foundation projects like Mormon Matters, A Thoughtful Faith, and Mormon Mental Health. We had the best quarter we've ever had as a foundation. We actually had, I want to say, something like 700,000 downloads and views in the month of March alone. Just this crazy number of downloads and YouTube views. We're growing significantly, and we just want to make sure everyone understands that all this is done through the Open Stories Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit that makes all this possible. So if you love these programs, if you want to see them continue, if you enjoy the podcast, we want you to please take a minute to become a monthly subscriber or donor to one of these podcasts or to the Open Stories Foundation. All donations are tax deductible and they're transparent. Our finances are transparent, and they go towards keeping the podcast alive. And that's why we're able to do this. So that's a lot of news. And I appreciate everyone's patience as we pay the bills, so to speak. And now we're going to turn to the reason we're all here. Today we are here to interview someone who I really admire, someone who I think is brilliant and fascinating and completely worth learning from. Her name is Kimberly Anderson. I came to know Kimberly because she was the leader of the Mama Dragons. What did you call it? The Mama Dragons storybook? What did you call it, Kimberly?
Well, I'll plug it.
Please plug it.
For a moment.
Yes.
So it's really important to understand that, so this is my project. It's the Mama Dragon Story Project. And it is, it's a suicide prevention effort designed to reach the new mom whose child has just come out to them. I photographed over 85 women. Each of those women wrote me an essay about their love for their child. And so it's a resource manual designed to reach out to the new mom. I am the creator and the organizer and the photographer and the editor of that project alone. I don't represent the Mama Dragons in any capacity. I'm just an individual who happened to be extremely, extremely fortunate to have been invited into this group and done this project, and people are using it in the most extraordinary ways, and there's lots of spin-off. Oh, and if I can just really quickly mention, I received the Spanish translation of all the essays and my introduction. I received that 2 days ago. So this next week or so, I've got spring break coming up between classes. I'm going to be laying that out, and we're going to get the Spanish-speaking version, or the Spanish version of the Mama Dragon Story Project out ASAP. The Portuguese version is underway. The Tagalog version for the Philippines is underway, and so things are happening, and it makes me very, very excited.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm excited too. And we did feature you guys in a previous episode of Mormon Stories. So
and thank you so much.
Yeah. So anyone who wants to check out the Mama Dragons episode of Mormon Stories, if you haven't already, Kimberly was on there with several other wonderful women. But that's how I met Kimberly as a Mama Dragon. Mm-hmm. But it gets but there's more to the story, as always. And so So Kimberly, I liked how we described her. Kimberly is a self-actualized woman. And to be honest, we could just stop there and just say that Kimberly is a wonderful, brilliant, thoughtful woman who has an amazing life story. And that would be adequate to justify what we're going to do is another Epic Mormon Stories interview. The reason why I don't stop there is because this is not just an epic individual brilliant person story. This is also covering a very important and timely set of topics that I think we've been wanting to discuss and that need discussion for many, many years and for many years to come. And so in addition to Kimberly just being a wonderful person, having a great story, Kimberly lived as she's made the change from living 45 years as a Mormon man to living openly as a woman. And so some of the themes that we will be discussing today, some of the opportunities for many of us to learn, including myself, are around issues around transgender topics, intersex topics. When we talk about LGBTQIA, oftentimes we're talking about LGB, lesbian, gay, and bisexual people. But what we often do is forget that some of those other acronyms are their own, deserve their own topic, their own treatment, their own discussion. And so we're going to be talking about these topics today as well. And I'm just going to say that listeners who have listened enough to Mormon Stories know that sometimes I try and assume sometimes I'm just ignorant. Sometimes I just don't know what I'm talking about. Sometimes I'm learning things for the first time. And sometimes I'll ask questions that may seem impolite or impolitic or whatever, because I want to have the discussion about how to healthily talk about some of these topics. And today is going to be all of that. We're going to be talking about Kimberly's wonderful life, but we're also going to be talking about very sensitive issues around gender, transgender, intersex sorts of topics. And there are going to be times where I ask questions, probably where I ask inappropriate questions, where I ask questions that are uncomfortable, that maybe I shouldn't even ask. Sometimes I may do that intentionally. Sometimes I may do that unintentionally. And so what we're going to say at the very beginning, and by the way, some of you may text questions or comments as well, meaning well, but not realizing that sometimes there are topics that you need to tread lightly on or not tread at all on. And so we're just going to say at the outset that for this very important discussion, I may ask questions that should or shouldn't be answered. But what Kimberly's going to do is she's going to thoughtfully and carefully correct and educate me and the rest of us anytime a topic comes up where we sort of cross that line. And so that's a lot of disclaimer. It's a lot of announcements, but I think all of it's important. So Kimberly, before we dive in, first of all, welcome back to Mormon Stories.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks to all of our listeners for tuning in. And Kimberly, why don't we begin by you just sort of adding on to whatever I said to just sort of, I don't know, clear the air or lighten the mood in terms of the seriousness, but also the importance of what we're going to be talking about today and how we approach it.
Lighten the mood? Well, I actually will just start by saying thank you. First of all, it's a tremendous opportunity, and I consider you now a friend. And so friends talk, friends screw up, and friends help each other. There's an interesting thing that's happened to me over the past few weeks. I've been hired as staff at the Sacramento Native American Health Center to run and facilitate a two-spirit healing circle. And at the Sacramento Native American Health Center, all of the staff wear a lanyard with their ID badge, and many of the staff have taken additional training to learn how to be a safe person. And on their lanyard, they have a little pin that they wear that indicates to the general public, I am one of those people that you can approach and to ask questions and talk about Native things with, and I will not be offended that you are asking me those things. And I thought, dang it, we need one of those pins like in the LGBT plus community to be able to signal to people that I'm one of those safe people that aren't going to bite your head off, that aren't going to get mad, that aren't going to be offended easily when you come to me and ask questions about topics that you may not know about. On the other hand, and this is crucial to remember, not every member of the community is willing to educate. Not every member of the community has the energy left to educate. This is a tiring, exhausting, personal track. I don't know if it's adequate to say how exhausting this is to constantly be going out every day and be worrying about who do I have to talk to, who doesn't know this, who's going to ask me that, on and on and on. And so many people justifiably have decided, I'm not going to be that person. I don't think it's my job to educate you. And really, it isn't their job to educate you. It's the general public's job to educate themselves about things that they don't know about. So even though today I'll be that safe person, I may not be that safe person the next time you see me. Don't assume, never assume that every member of the LGBT plus community is willing to be that educator for you. So this term of treading lightly is super, super important. Oh, and also I learned something from Grant Palmer. I had the beautiful chance to meet with him for a few hours last month, and he told me about this idea of radical patience. And when I heard those words come out of his mouth, it sat with me, and I thought, okay, this is something that I need to really incorporate into who I am in every aspect of my life. I need to really be willing to practice radical patience. Some people aren't ready to do that. Some people have already done that, and their radical patience has expired. So just since we're doing all kinds of disclaimers and all kinds of education right out of the gate here, that'll be the first thing that I'll say is, today I'm a safe space. Today I'm an open book, but I reserve the right to rip out pages and to redact certain things. So if I seem hesitant at times, it's because I'm trying to protect some semblance of my own integrity. Also, I have relationships that are ongoing and existing that I want to protect and I want to respect. So yeah, so that kind of is where I'll just stop there and I'll just pitch it back to you.
That's beautiful. Yeah. And if we could think about it, like imagine a classroom of 9 white people and a person of color. Can you imagine? We don't think about like, hey, person of color, why don't you tell us all what it's like to be a person of color? Like, it's not necessarily, let's just say, a minority's job to educate the majority. It puts a lot of pressure on them. There's not just one minority experience. I've heard the term, for example, if you've met one transgender person, you've met one transgender person. You've never, like there's no such thing as the transgender experience. And so there are all sorts of problems with this model of hey, minority, help teach us, and it's more than just the fact that we're too lazy oftentimes. So I tell you, I believe that this story is going to save lives. I thank you so much for being willing to assume this role. And I love that you're reminding us that doesn't give us free rein to sort of assault you with questions for the rest of time immemorial and to invade your privacy, or anyone else's for that matter.
Exactly.
I love that.
Exactly.
Now, one of the things that you and I talked about, what we were going to try and do is from the beginning, talk about the things that from in terms of your personal life, your personal space, we're not going to talk about in depth or even necessarily superficially. And this is important not only to respect your privacy, but to start giving us a sense for things that we should be careful about asking when we're meeting anyone who happens to be LGBTQ, trans, intersex, or anything else, right? Mm-hmm. So do you mind? Do you want to list, or do you mind if I list the things that we're not going to be asking you in depth about in terms of your personal?
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, so you mentioned surgery. Now again, we have the option of talking about these things broadly, but in terms of your personal life, things that we want to really be sensitive about, or even maybe not even talk about. Your personal, if there have been any surgeries, not digging into that. If there have been any diagnoses, and I think this relates at least to the intersex sort of question, not necessarily saying, well, what diagnosis do you have? Because that's can be really personal and offensive and unnecessary. In your case, you've been previously married, and so you have an ex-spouse, an ex-wife that we'll be talking about. We want to respect her privacy.
Absolutely.
Anything regarding your sex life is something that is just, you just don't want to be asking anyone about their sex life, right? You do have children, and so we want to be really sensitive about respecting their privacy. And then genitalia, obviously, someone who's just trying to learn and is curious is going to want to well, let's talk about genitalia. But again, would you ever do that in any other context? And so this is just sort of basic common sense and politeness. But I just want to make sure and warn listeners, please don't be asking questions around those topics in your comments, if that's okay. Now, do you want to add anything to that, Kimberly?
I do, as a matter of fact. A lot of the things that are off limits today, I'm happy to talk about with people in a one-on-one situation. But I kind of like this idea that you kind of have to earn me. Not that I'm, all that, but if you want to, ask me and learn things about me, this is going to be a two-way street. I'm going to learn things about your life that you may be uncomfortable asking, or me asking you. Same with, back and forth. I look at it in terms of forming a friendship. Look at it in terms of forming a multi-year conversation with people. Look at it in terms of forming a long-term relationship that will transcend any sort of personal issue with me or personal issue with you. This is something that I look forward to. I engage with people regularly, and I think to myself, this is someone I'm going to know for 30 years. I'm willing to invest a lot of me in you for the next 30 years. So yeah, just that's, yeah.
Love it. I love it. And to be honest, I've wanted to interview you for some time, but it was cool that we got to spend some time together, beforehand, right? And
yes, we had a wonderful 2.5 hour lunch, and that doesn't mean everyone gets 2.5 hours of John's time. I feel very blessed that I got that day. And I won't say where we went, but it was one of my favorite places in Logan that you can order hot wings.
I loved it. All right. So perfect. I think we've got some good ground rules under the way. So if you're ready, why don't we go ahead and dive in, and let's start where you want. Obviously, I want to start by just talking about your, to the extent to which you have sort of a traditional Mormon heritage that precedes you.
Yes.
So let's dive into your story, Kimberly.
So I was born in 1968. I was born actually here in Sacramento, where I'm sitting now. I was born to a single mother, and who had me in her custody for about 5 weeks. And then for circumstances that I don't know, I have not met her and spoken to her about this, but she decided to give me up for adoption. And so I was placed into state custody for, I think, 4 to 5 weeks before my adoptive parents took custody of me around the, end of November, beginning of December. And at the time, my father was teaching at UC Davis. And so we moved to Davis, California. And I actually know the address of the house that they occupied. And I've been to the home and I've stood in front of it and kind of had a little moment of, this is kind of where my journey begins. My dad got a job in Logan at in Fort Collins, Colorado, at Colorado State University. And then he was hired at Utah State in Logan, where we moved there in 1978. The reason I know that year so specifically is I remember watching Star Wars in Fort Collins and Empire Strikes Back in Logan. So everything revolves around Star Wars. My students have heard me say that before. I am certainly able to make at least one more Star Wars reference today. So I did most of my growing up in Logan. My mother, her parents were LDS, or my adopted mother, her parents were LDS. With a rich pioneer heritage. My father's parents have a rich pioneer heritage as well. They settled St. George and then were part of the Hole in the Rock project expedition. And we can have lots of other words to describe Hole in the Rock. But they went and settled in southwestern Colorado, south of Durango. And we still have the family farm there. They're still trying to eke out a living in the patch of dirt that is south of Durango. And we have a rich pioneer heritage in that area. I was adopted and then sealed a year later in the Oakland Temple. And that kind of plays a significant role in my faith journey.
How was that?
Well, I decided actually to resign my formal membership. I resigned the name of my former self's membership. And that kind of could be its whole.
Okay. We'll talk about that in the future. Okay. But you were sealed to your parents.
Sealed to my parents in Oakland. Yep. Okay. And raised a very, very, very traditional Mormon home. Baptized at 8. And there's kind of a funny story about my baptism. I remember coming out of the font and standing on the steps, dripping wet. And I said to myself, "Oh, I'm perfect." And then I went, "Oh shit. No, I'm not perfect."
What did you mean?
Guilt and shame just poured on me that I was prideful and I was boastful and I was arrogant about I've arrived at my state of perfection. And in that moment of arriving in my state of perfection, I sabotaged myself and I'm no longer perfect.
Yeah. I can relate to that.
So that 8-year-old child, in the glorious moment of baptism, everyone's there around you and everyone's excited, squashing yourself, just, it was, and I think I realized in that moment that's like, oh, something's up that's not making sense.
Sure. Now I'm going to start with one of the most delicate questions. I guess we can say that maybe we could say the gender that was handed to you or given to you as a child was male. Is that the way you'd say it, or how would you say it?
So the transgender and the intersex community have this phrase that we like to use. It's called assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. And you can also call that your assigned gender.
Okay.
And that's kind of the way that you talk about it, because your gender is not something that you
chose.
As an infant, at least.
Right.
As a newborn child, you pop out. Oh, look, there's the presence of an X. There's a present, or and in this terms it would. Oh, there's a penis. This is a little boy. Oh, there's a non-penis. This is probably a little girl.
Right.
So yeah, the doctors assigned you that gender. Your parents certainly assigned you that gender, and they may have assigned you that gender before you even came out. Nowadays, with ultrasounds and 3D So
no, you're getting the room pink, and you're getting the room blue, or you're getting the room pink. You're buying the clothes.
Baby shower,
baby showers. I mean, your gender's been picked for you in many cases, and so
go ahead.
No, please.
Oh, it's interesting. So I'm enrolled right now in a marriage and family therapy program, and in the very, very first class, it was called development over the lifespan development class. And in that class, I learned about this phrase called identity foreclosure. And I read about the description and I went, oh,
Tell us what that means. Tell us what that means.
So identity foreclosure, it's an interesting phrase. Identity clearly is all the things that make you, you. And then there's this idea that foreclosure is attached to the end of that. Now, if you've ever bought a home, if you've ever sold a home, if you've ever had a mortgage of any kind, you understand that there's this thing looming over you, this institution looming over you that is ready to foreclose, that's ready to come in and remove from you forcibly this thing that you've reached for and tried to earn. In the case of identity, it's the same idea that you have this thing that you think is yourself, but in the background there is either an institution or an organization or people that are ready to swoop in and take from you this thing that you have that innately that is yours. And so I feel early on, or they're ending this relationship with your own identity. So this identity foreclosure is, you may have your own identity. You may think that you know who you are, but other things, external situations, don't allow you to become those things that you know that you are. And I think this identity, or this concept of identity foreclosure, goes way beyond gender. It goes way beyond any kind of a gender identity or a misidentified or a misassigned gender at birth. It goes way into the Orthodox religious communities. It goes way into all kinds of different aspects of who we are. You know, just talking about gender identity foreclosure now, I'm certain that there are people in the audience that are going, wow, this happened to me in this way, this way, and this way. And none of those things had anything to do with gender.
Maybe you're a woman and you wanted to be a police officer or a professor. Maybe you're a man and you wanted to be a stay-at-home mom, you know, but
or you're short and you wanted to be an NBA all-star.
Right, exactly. Or if you're light-skinned, maybe you want to be dark-skinned. Who knows, right?
Something.
Yeah. Okay. And maybe your spiritual inklings were different than kind of whatever religious institution you were raised in. And so you never really felt in harmony with the spiritual stuff you inherited, whatever that might be.
And so exactly. So it can be multi-shades of multicolors of an infinite meaning of everything. It's just, it permeates everything. And because it's so ubiquitous in our lives, I was honestly surprised that I hadn't heard this phrase before.
Right.
I read this and I'm like, this is amazing. So this idea of identity foreclosure, I want to write a paper about it. I want to present at Sunstone if I can. Please, Lindsay.
I'm sure
I'll pitch it right there. But this idea of identity foreclosure in the LDS community is super, super powerful.
Totally agree. Okay, so the gender you were sort of assigned at birth
male at birth, yep.
Was male. Now, how did that play out in your early years as a child? Did you have disharmony in your mind between how you thought of yourself and what had been assigned? When did that first start feeling out of sync for you?
So for a long time, I kind of wasn't sure how that all kind of trickled out. But as I'm, in this program where you learn how to examine others, you're forced to examine yourself. And so through this process, I've kind of gone back and I've re-looked at a lot of things. And I can honestly say that there was kind of never a moment where I didn't know. I always felt that there was some sort of discord, that there was some sort of mismatch, and I didn't really know what that was. And I think it's important to remember that, I was born in 1968, and the language that existed at that time broadly just did not exist for people who weren't quite sure about who they were internally, not matching with their external presentation. Also, being raised
what would the language have been in the 70s, right?
So you would have had words like transsexual, which is a word that's not commonly used anymore. The word that they use now is called transgender. You would have had words like transvestism or transvestite, which has a really negative connotation for many people, although transvestism is a normal aspect of human development. And you would have also had words like crossdresser, which again have really negative connotations in any kind of an orthodox religious belief. But as far as human development and human experience, cross-dressing is very, very natural. Ask any woman at BYU in the 50s and 60s when the first time they were able to wear pants to class was, and they will tell you this was a momentous event in their life. So this idea that we cross-dress is everyone does this.
And did the LDS Church, let's just say the early 70s, mid-70s, have any policies around either transgender concerns or intersex sort of concerns?
So as far as I'm able to dig, and most of the Bishop's Handbook #1 is available online. I think that language kind of introduced itself in the mid to late 80s. The transgender aspect of or elective transsexual surgeries, et cetera, et cetera. I think that was the first time that language was really introduced into the LDS space, and I think it was probably forced onto them through some events that they may have had no control over.
Yeah.
And I believe that there is a author of note who is coming out with a wonderful volume about these things, and that story will be fully told later on in another venue.
Okay.
So I don't want to talk about that too much because I don't want to spoil the ending.
And then the only other thing I'll just ask is, as I understand it, the way that they used to handle intersex sort of related issues with children regarding surgery and birth is very different now than how they might have handled it 30 or 40 years ago.
Well, I'm not even exactly sure about that. I have dug and dug and dug, and I have not met other people who have had this type of an experience. I haven't read any literature. It just doesn't exist. I don't know how things were back then. I barely know how things are now.
Okay. No, that's fine. I mean, the one thing I've heard is that if a child, maybe explain to us really quickly, tell us what intersex means and how that's different from transgender.
So intersex is an interesting word. Even in the intersex community, even in the medical community, the word intersex is kind of loaded. And you can safely say that there are between 30 and 34 different individual diagnoses, medical diagnoses, that are encompassed within this idea of intersex. So intersex, even though it is a state of being and it is an identity, it only is an indicator that there's something else that has been diagnosed by a doctor. So a person may have a specific diagnosis that relates to external genitalia. They may have a diagnosis that relates to internal genitalia. Their diagnosis may refer to the inability to either produce or to absorb, to accept certain hormones, either testosterone or estrogen. Their diagnosis may have nothing to do with any of those things, but have to do with other things, like a chromosomal marker that manifests itself in either internal or external genitalia. Very, very, very rarely does intersex mean the presence of both external male and external female genitalia. Very, very rarely. So this idea that intersex is hermaphrodism, that's a huge misnomer. And even the word hermaphrodism or hermaphrodite is kind of looked at as this negative word that's not used any longer. And intersex or intersex person or intersex experience is the proper way to talk about that.
Okay. And this is my understanding. So someone, for example, can be born, let's just say chromosomally XY, which would be male, but because of some condition, they don't develop external male genitalia. And so they look like a female baby to their parents. And so they're assigned a female gender at birth based on the appearance of their genitalia, even though their chromosomes may actually be technically male. Is that an example?
It is. And that person can identify their entire life as female into their adulthood as female. It may not necessarily provoke a gender identity crisis.
Right.
This person,
in fact, they can not even know that they're intersex, right?
Yes.
They're genetic males who think they're females, have always thought they're females, and in reality, and oftentimes they're not able to have kids.
Right.
But they never realize that genetically they're male.
Right. However, let's be very careful. Women who may not be able to have children, this does not indicate that person is intersex.
Right, of course.
So never, my policy now, you can't assume anything about anyone ever. Only know what they've told you to their face.
Right.
So yeah, the lack of a uterus, the lack of the ability to conceive and bear a child does not in any way indicate that person is intersex. However, there are intersex women who are genetically male that do not have the presence of ovaries or uterus.
Right. And then just a couple other examples. So there can be people born with a partial male penis, a penis that's inside. And then what would ambiguous or mixed genitalia, what would some examples of that be?
Well, there's a ton of resources online. One of the things that's actually quite stunning to learn about is this tool called the Phall-O-meter, PHLL-O-meter. And if you Google Phall-O-meter, you're going to see a little tiny ruler that has a pink end, a section in the middle that's like, who knows? And then a blue end, and they measure the clitoris, and they go, okay, underneath this size is going to be a girl. Over this size, it's going to be a boy. In this gray zone, what are we going to do, Mom? What are we going to do, Dad? What are we going to do, Doctor Jones?
Right.
What do we do with this child? So the Phall-O-meter is an actual thing that's used. There are stages of, so not to get too graphic, but the male penis has a urethra, and the urethra typically ends at the tip of the penis in the center. And but that urethra can exit the shaft of the penis at many, many locations along the shaft of the penis. That condition is called Hypospadias, and that historically has been looked at as an intersex condition. However, even Hypospadias is not so cut and dry, let's say, as to whether or not it is a true intersex condition. So that's what I mean when I say that even in the intersex community of individuals and medical practitioners, there is kind of this gray area, what situation constitutes an intersex diagnosis and what does not. So that's why it's somewhat nebulous.
Right. And just to kind of drive this home back to your story, you do identify as intersex, is that correct?
So one of the things that I want to make sure that I talk about is that there's lots and lots of undiagnosed characteristics, lots and lots of research that's going on today about the transgender brain, about the transgender hormonal experience in utero. And, my experience is my experience. I can't say, so this might be one of those frying pan, and anyone that's in school with me knows what frying pan means. My situation, it's very careful not to pathologize the individual. And one of the things that I don't want to kind of open up to the world is any kind of a special little X, Y, or Z. But my experience is that I fully believe that the transgender person falls under the intersex umbrella. I also believe that the intersex umbrella or the intersex individual can have a completely valid transgender experience if they are assigned the wrong gender at birth and decide to transition later. And that's the way I look at my situation, is I inhabit characteristics of both sides of this. And actually to say both sides is incorrect because there are infinite sides to this story, right, or this situation.
Okay.
Many intersex people decide not to change their external gender or their external gender presentation. Many intersex people choose not to have any kind of normalizing surgeries. It's actually one of the most fascinating things of human development that I've run across is this idea that I was born this way, I had this epiphany at some point, and then I either choose to or not choose to make a change or make a direction correction. Well, okay. Direction correction, that's like a...
That was great. No,
that was awesome.
I love it. Love it. Okay, so as a young Mormon child assigned the gender of male...
As assigned male bears, yep.
You're growing up knowing that there's something not right, but trying to just be a normal kid, right?
Oh, trying to remain invisible. That's the way I look at my childhood.
Talk about that if you don't mind, especially within the Mormon context.
Well,
and just the childhood context.
Right. Now, I want to be careful too, because at some level, I do have a relationship with my parents. And I think that they might watch this or my siblings might watch this. I don't know. It's largely immaterial whether or not they see it or not, but I want to make sure that I respect their privacy and I honor their role and all the things that they did for me as parents. I learned early on that messaging from my parents and from my siblings and from church made no room for someone who felt different. There was no room for someone who felt different. In fact, the messaging was very damning. It was very hateful. It was very painful. And so I learned just to kind of hold my head down, keep my head down, stay out of the way, not cause any trouble. And this kind of went into my, even into my wardrobe. For an entire year, I think it was my 8th grade year, I wore a gray hooded sweatshirt, like every day of junior high, at South Cass Junior High. And I wore it so often it became the butt of jokes in my family, and they named it the gray thing. And I took my picture for school that year wearing the gray thing. Just, it was like the only thing that I had that I could pretend I was invisible within. And the gray thing has been the butt of jokes up into my adulthood. And I don't know, well, of course I don't know because I've never expressed this to them ever. But that gray thing was like my shield. It was my armor. It was the only thing that made me feel like I didn't stand out. Because the first thing that or the last thing rather, that you want to have happen is you want to draw any attention to yourself. The last thing you want to do is draw any scrutiny to yourself, to let other people see into you and wonder, oh, something's different with that person. I wonder if they're transgender. Or I wonder if they're secretly harboring this secret, or I wonder if they're really this. You just want to hide, and there are many identities in life that we can occupy that make you want to retreat and to hide. In my case, it was my gender confusion, or my state of gender. That confusion made me want to not extend myself and be vocal, I guess. So that kind of plays into even me sitting down right now with you. This is like, I'm being incredibly vulnerable. This is incredibly nerve-wracking for me. And I know a lot of people would look at me and go, oh, she's got it all together. What is she talking about? And I'm like, okay, whatever. You guys don't know. This is serious business, coming out and talking about your story and explaining your vulnerabilities. And really just kind of laying a lot of it on the table face up. So I do appreciate the audience, and I do appreciate the opportunity, but at the same time, this is like super, super nerve-wracking.
Yeah, I understand. I can only imagine, and I hope we can all be respectful to that, and also be just really appreciative and grateful for what you're doing.
Well, and I would displace that gratefulness to anyone that allows you into their life in a very sensitive situation. But thank you. I do appreciate that. But that, I think that courtesy, you should be willing to grant that to anyone that lets you into their sacred space.
Absolutely.
So just to kind of move forward, I guess, I don't want to get bogged down a lot of
No, it's good. Stuff. So your concern as let's just say a young child or
a young Mormon boy, you can say that. That's
a young
fine,
Mormon boy
mm-hmm.
was not to present as male versus female. It was just to stay invisible.
Oh, and just keep my head down, do my chores, do what I was told, try and get good grades, do the science fair project on time, not complain when we have to get out of bed at 4 a.m. to go round up the horses that got out at night. Just do our thing and stay out of the way.
Were there things that people expected of you, thinking of you as male, that you weren't comfortable doing and didn't like? Were there things that you wanted to do that people associated with being female that you felt like you couldn't do? Did you have any of those sorts of dilemmas as a child or as a young teenage?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, yes. So my dad's research animal was the horse. He taught animal science. And so we were raised on a horse farm, which was a wonderful, wonderful way to grow up. A lot of responsibility, a lot of work, but a hell of a lot of fun. I mean, honestly, we grew up in Southern Cache Valley where there were no fences and no homes, and we could just ride and ride and ride. And we did. We rode all the time. And we rode in the fairs, we rode in the parades, we rode in the horse shows. My kind of secret little dream was to ride in the horse shows, and as a girl, I wanted to be a barrel racer. I didn't want to do, the calf roping and those other things that I did never do because they were very, very male. However, had the chance been offered to me to, do barrel racing, which is a traditionally girls' Western sport, I would have loved to have been a barrel racer. I would have loved to have ridden English pleasure in a more feminine costume. I would have loved to have ridden Western pleasure in a pink hat and boots. That wasn't going to happen, largely because I was just too afraid to express anything about myself to anybody. It was just buried way, way, way deep, even deep enough that I couldn't see it at times.
Absolutely. How did it affect your relationship with your peers?
I was very introverted. In middle school, I was very introverted. My brother, very gregarious, very outgoing. My older sister, very popular, very outgoing. And I just kind of, I'm that middle child. Plus, let's not forget, I've got adoption stuff swirling around.
Yeah.
I just stayed out of the way. I saw my siblings occupying the role of kind of the popular ones. And so I kind of accepted my role as just kind of backing away. Now that did change a little bit in high school as I kind of found my crowd of kids to hang out with. I was in the marching band at Mountain Crest High School, and I loved that experience. However, within the context of the marching band, I played the trombone, but I wanted to be a rifle. I wanted to play the flute. I wanted to play the clarinet. I wanted to play those and occupy those roles that were very stereotypically female. And
is rifle spinning around the rifle?
Oh, the rifles that, you're doing the things. And now they do swords and they do all kinds of crazy stuff. But back then it was just, well, I guess maybe they did swords. I don't know.
And it was women. It was girls.
So only girls. Yep. Yeah. Only girls.
Yeah.
And within the context of the band, I had tons of friends who were all in the color guard. I loved my color guard friends, largely because I was able to kind of be in their world, learn about, what it's like to be a girl, what it's like to occupy that role as a woman in a very non-threatening way. So in that regard, I was super, super popular with all the color guard girls. There was no shortage of me having a date on Friday night or Thursday night or having, or Saturday night or whatever night. There was no shortage of girls that I could go hang out with because they loved me because I was not a threat. I was completely sympathetic to their issues and their problems, and I wanted to learn about them. What kind of boyfriend? I'm like the perfect boyfriend. Oh, plus, whatever. I didn't even want to go there sexually because I was terrified of my own sexuality. I didn't even know what that was.
So in that case, a law of chastity is really convenient. Right? Because it says just don't go there, right?
The law of chastity, you can just remove the word law, and it was just like the way of survival is chastity. That's the way I looked at it.
Yeah. Interesting. Was there any point, let's just say up through your teenage years, where you felt desires to express, dress or act in a, as female in terms of gender, but you just couldn't? Did you have desires to put on a dress or, put on makeup or any of that stuff, or did that not occur to you at that age?
So the answer is yes. The long answer is 24/7.
All the time.
All the time.
Okay. But is that something where you would try and do that secretly and not let anyone know, or did that not happen in those early years, childhood, teen years?
So it's interesting. My family, we would do like theater things, and we had small traveling little singing groups that we would do productions and little singing, sharing things like at the nursing home or at the church or whatever. So we had like outfits and costumes in a room in our house. Excuse me, there's a Coke burp. And we kept all those costumes in our furnace room. And so I knew where all those costumes were. And so the furnace room kind of became my place where I could, go through those boxes and find those articles of clothing that my sister may have worn in a performance. I remember one time I was in the furnace room trying on some clothes, and my mother was downstairs, and she must have heard me in there. And she knocked on the door, and she opened it up, and she saw me in there dressed. I held my foot against the door, didn't want her to come in, turned the lights off, didn't want her to come in. I was completely embarrassed. She opened the door and found me in this state of being, and she asked me what I was doing, and I said I wanted to know if I was taller than my sister. And she said, oh, well, we don't do that. That you should go change immediately. We don't do those things. And so, looking back as a parent, and putting it into the context of who she was and who she is, and putting it into the context of society at the time, of course she's going to have that reaction.
Of course.
Looking at it through parents' eyes in society now, I would suggest and I would hope that if a parent found their child cross-dressing in secret, that they should just completely remove any shame and any guilt associated with that.
Say, how fun, how awesome.
Well, not even go there, not even promote it or be ecstatic about it, but just look at it as an opportunity for a conversation. Here's my chance to learn more about you. What is this? Tell me about this. Why do you do this? What are your motivations for doing this? What do you hope to gain from this? Is there anything about you that I should know that I don't know already? I think that we kind of tend to overreact with I'm a great ally. I'm a great parent. Let's get you signed up for the makeup classes, and let's get you into the rifle spinning classes, and let's get you, when really that's not where the child is mentally, because a lot of times a child doesn't even know themselves where they're at. And I've heard many, many parents be like, oh, so are you gay? And the child goes, no. Or are you trans? And the child goes, oh, no, that's not me. Mainly because of this internalized transphobia, internalized homophobia. They know that parent's not a safe place. They know that the world's not a safe place. So they just protect themselves by just denying everything. And that's what I did. I'm just like, no.
Okay. So did you feel a lot of shame when you had that experience with your mom?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And that shame, even speaking about it now, I can feel that shame in that moment.
Yeah.
Which again might be unfair to the person who I felt was shaming me or guilting me into those feelings, because that was, the early 80s. When
of course.
It was way different. Mm-hmm.
What can any parent do but the best that they know how at the time they know it? And
the mind frame that both of my parents were in was not accepting.
Oprah always says, when you know better, you do better, hopefully,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully. What about did it ever reach a point, let's just say pre-mission, where it was like a thing, where it was like mommy and daddy's little secret, there's a problem here, or were there only just little small hints or instances, but it never actually got to the point where like mom and dad are wanting you to go to a therapist or to a doctor, or pathologizing it as a problem?
Right. So no, there wasn't. I learned my lesson very quickly to hide, and it was never an issue. In fact, when I spoke with my parents about this, a couple of years ago, they said things like, we never knew, you never said anything, we wish we would have known, we could have gotten you help. And in the back of my head, I'm thinking, thank God you didn't know, because you'd have sent me to a therapist that would have shocked the living shit out of me with a car battery.
Right.
So in a lot of ways, I kind of look at my fear as being the thing that preserved me. I was able to kind of get through childhood, get through young adulthood in relative anonymity, and stay away from all those things that they may have sent me to, that would have more than likely been very, very damaging.
On the other hand, I don't think we could over sort of emphasize the possible complexity or even harm that you must have experienced by feeling the need to hide and lie like 24/7. And I don't mean you were a liar 24/7. I just mean,
I do. I will admit that completely. Yep.
So talk about that, what that does when you feel like you have to hide and lie for like 15 years, 20 years.
45 years.
45 years, right. What's that like? What is that?
Shitty. It's an awful way to live. And those issues of trust and of lying to myself and of hiding have had repercussions throughout my professional career. It had significant repercussions in my marriage, which I feel terrible about. I don't want to excuse and to justify my behavior as not being someone that told the entire truth the entire time. I tried to be the best person I knew how to be, but lying to preserve who I was just my way of being. You go in for that Temple Recommend interview, and they ask you, are you honest in your dealings with your fellow man? And I'm like, well, I'm sitting here in front of you wearing a suit and a tie, so no, I'm not honest. I'm lying through my teeth about who I am to you every single day. And so the way that I would answer that question was, I'm doing the best that I can, Bishop. I'm doing the best that I can, President.
Right.
And then they're like, oh, but we all do the best that we can. And it gets all chummy, and I'm like, just, if you only knew, just shut up, just leave me alone.
Yeah. Is there an impact of having to lie to everyone else? And you sort of, I think you mentioned this a tiny bit. You said, is there a degree to which you learn to lie to yourself, or you get out of touch with yourself about who you are? Does it not only affect your relationships with others, does it affect your honesty with yourself?
Oh, completely.
How is that? How does that work?
I don't know how it works, but I know how it manifests itself.
Yeah.
I went through my entire junior high in a fog, like a literal fog. I remember 2 days of junior high school. The one day was when the health teacher talked about sex ed, the one day. And the other day that I remember was, I don't remember that day. Junior high was a fog. And then I kind of got in with the band, and I met my group of people, and I started to kind of learn who I could be. And then I started taking photographs for the high school yearbook, and that was a real huge source of validation for myself, that I actually had something that I could do that other people respected and had thought it was cool, that I was the yearbook photographer. And that kind of plays out in the rest of my life in many, many ways. But lying to myself and hiding from myself, even amongst my inner circle of friends, I never came out to anybody. I think I came out to one of my girlfriends in high school, and she didn't quite understand what it was I was talking about. I will always think highly of her. She tried to do the best that she could with me, but I think in a lot of ways it's outside of our experience. And what do we do with those things? We just kind of put them aside. Not that she put me aside, because she was a dear friend for a long, long time.
But there has to be a degree to which you either learn to shut down your inner emotions,
absolutely,
or to self-medicate and that can be through drugs and alcohol, or through just avoidance, sleeping, depression, staying busy. There are lots of ways we can numb, right?
So staying busy was never a problem. And I think that was also a saving grace between band practice, between performances, between the horses, between school, between practicing. We were always doing something. My parents kept us very, very busy. Probably another thing that allowed me to get through my teenage years. I did have 1 or 2 flirtations with suicidal ideation. But the fear of doing it wrong, the fear of inducing the wrath of my mother, kept me from even enacting or formulating a suicide plan. Just keeping my head down and staying busy kind of got me through all that ugly stuff. And, I shouldn't even say ugly stuff, because I don't know that it was ugly, because I was so numb. Right. I didn't self-medicate. Later on in high school, junior, senior year, we did drink a lot of beer, and I did smoke a lot of pot. But I never bought a stitch of it, either alcohol or marijuana. But I shouldn't say we smoked a ton of pot. We smoked pot enough that I knew what it was like. I knew what to expect when I was going to smoke, but I did not smoke it enough to self-medicate my pain with.
It was just what kids did.
It's just what, yeah. It's just what we did. It's what some kids did, I should say.
Right. Yeah. I didn't, but yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm sure a lot of kids in my ward did when I was growing up. And we're about the same age. We're almost the same age. What about your role with Heavenly Father, your spiritual life, your inner life, your prayer? During those teen years, did this even come up? Did you believe in God? And if so, did this come up in your prayers with Heavenly Father or Mother?
So the concept of God was something that I knew I was supposed to know. I was taught that I was supposed to love this person. I was taught that I was supposed to have a relationship with this person. But I was also taught that this person hated me, that this person felt that who I was in my inner core of my being was going to damn me to hell. So I grew up largely in fear of God and being grateful that I did not have a relationship with God. And trust me, I tried. I checked off all the boxes. I did all the work. I did all the prayers. I did all the reading. I went to seminary. I was in Scouts. I was a Deacon's Quorum president, Teachers Quorum president, Priest Quorum president. I was an Order of the Arrow recipient in Boy Scouts. I got to be the Life Scout, 3 marriages short of my Eagle Scout. One thing that is actually pretty interesting was when I went to go get my patriarchal blessing, I was terrified to get it. I was terrified to get it because I was worried that, okay, here's God. He's going to speak to me. He's going to lay down the hammer. Dead name person, here's what's going on with you. And I was terrified that my secret was going to come out and that I would be forced to kind of reconcile all these things. And I sat in that chair and he put his hands on my head and the blessing came out and I'm just like sitting there cringing going, is it next? Is it next? Is my truth next? In other words, is this patriarch going to reveal God's will to me through the patriarch? Is it coming? And when it never did, I'm like going, well, clearly 2 things are going on. Either God's not there or God doesn't care. Which hurts more? So I kind of got the feeling that God wasn't there. My young teenage self laden to the point of breaking dozens and dozens of times growing up. The minute that blessing ended, my shelf is broken, gone.
You were, in your heart of hearts, you were hoping that maybe there would be a reference to you to being a female soul, a female spirit.
Yep.
Something that would give you a sign of God's knowing of you and understanding of you.
Exactly. Yeah. Instead of a roadmap of maleness. That's what I was given.
Mission and marry a beautiful young woman in the temple.
In the temple, children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's so heartbreaking. And so really quick, I'm curious, you said that you were taught that God hated you. And I don't mean to make that literal, so to speak, but I would guess that there wouldn't have been a lot of conversation around issues like transgender topics in the 80s. And so I'm surprised that it would have even come up. So what was the Mormon language that, what were the topics that gave you the sense that maybe God hated you in the Mormon context?
Spencer W. Kimball's Miracle of Forgiveness.
Right.
A book that I have dedicated many hours of my life to burning many copies of.
Did he talk about this in there?
Yes.
Transgender. What was said in there? If you know, or
I've kind of tried to purge that from my mind, but I will talk about it in as much as I can remember it. Just something about how they would call them so-called transsexuals. I think that's the first instance where I heard this phrase "so-called" was the Miracle of Forgiveness, and they talk about like women who think that they're men or men that think that they're women, or these so-called transsexuals. And I'm just like, what? And then there was this giant chapter about the crime against humanity. And I'm like, well, whoa, what's this? Clearly I'm not fitting all these other roles. So if you think that because I don't fit this other slot of existence, that I then inhabit this slot of existence that's a pedophile and a social demon and someone that should be drowned in the depths of the sea with a millstone around their neck, holy crap. Thanks a lot, Prophet Kimball, because at that time, Spencer W. Kimball was my prophet. These messages are extremely damaging. They strip away any sense of self-worth. They strip away any sense of self-value. They lay a layer of questions about deity. They lay on top of a layer of questions about prophecy. They lay a layer of question about validity of all the things that I've learned, and they put the gospel truths inside this bubble of just layers and layers of things that I knew weren't true. You can't say these things about me because I'm 15 and I've never seen another person naked other than in gym class. I've never had a sexual experience with any other person. Not even masturbation. So how can I be condemned to hell by somebody who doesn't even know me, by things that I've never even experienced or I've even heard about? So
super harmful.
Oh.
And the stakes are so raised because we're taught as Mormon doctrine that the prophets speak with God. And so it's not just some old man spouting out an opinion. It's by the voice of God or by my servants, it is the same.
Mm-hmm.
And so
So here I am listening to these things and thinking, okay, is this the conference? Is this the general conference where they're going to finally talk about me? Is this the general conference where they're finally going to talk about things that give me a glimmer of hope into my path through this world? 6 months. Nope. 6 months. Nope. 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 Year after year after year. And I'm like, what? God is really trying my patience.